A horse pulls up outside the saloon and a stranger pushes his way through the swing doors. Everyone turns to look. The pianist stops playing and an expectant hush falls over the barroom, for the stranger is a gunslinger and is dressed in a paper hat, a paper waistcoat, a paper shirt, paper pants, paper boots, and his hand is resting on the butt of his pistol in its paper holster. It's okay though, because the sheriff arrested him for rustling. Yes, folks, today on Dragon's Teeth, we're heading back to the Wild West. Hi folks, thanks for joining me today, or should I say howdy partners. The Wild West is one of those genres you grow up with, isn't it? It's a bit like pirates or Robin Hood, that kind of stuff. And I'm sure we all like a good western. I think probably my favourite is still the spaghetti westerns, the Good, the Bad and the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars, that kind of thing. And it's always interesting for me to see as well how many of those great westerns were based, of course, on Japanese films and stories like The Seven Samurai. So a nice sort of crossover there. And I think as a genre, the Wild West, or the fictional Wild West at least, lends itself really well to skirmish gaming. So, down at Bedford Gladiators, Ove said he was putting together a short campaign for a set of rules called Fistful of Lead Reloaded. Now, I like a good skirmish game, I like a western, so I was keen to get involved in this. And something else that caught my interest as well, given that I'm writing my own set of fantasy rules with a similar sort of theme, is this wasn't one side versus another, but this was 4 or 5 players, each controlling a band of about 5 or 6 characters, and each with their own aims and objectives, which might tally with another group's, but also, as we found out in this particular game, certainly didn't tally at all. And that's one of the things I like with this type of skirmish game, where you get this narrative going on as well. There's a sort of backstory to it. It's not just a scenario where you have to capture the bridge or whatever it is. You've got this underlying narrative which adds a lot of atmosphere and interest to the game, I think. Fistful of Lead Reloaded, I think the set we used was the 2nd edition. These are written and published by Wiley Games about 20 years ago, I think, so they're by no means a new set of rules. And Wiley Games have taken the core mechanics of this set and applied them not only to westerns, but also to ancients, to medieval, to horse and musket, sci-fi, fantasy. So I'm assuming that if we looked at those other genres as well, it'd be pretty much the same mechanics. And given, as I said, that I'm developing my own set of fantasy skirmish rules along similar lines, I was very interested to see how these mechanics worked. Basically, it's a card-driven system, so it gets rid of one of my pet peeves, as you probably know if you've been watching for a while, where you have to roll initiative, and in some games you might not even get to move, which I find a little bit off-putting. What Fistful of Lead does is uses a card-based initiative. Everyone gets to go, but you're never quite sure when your characters will be able to move. Anyway, I'll talk about that as we get into the game as we go along. And as I said, Ove has set this up as a mini campaign, so there's going to be 4 or 5 games going on. This is something else I like as well, because of course what happens in one game has a direct influence on the next game. You might have characters taken out, they might develop, they might gain certain attributes or skills, and of course if there's different objectives, then those can shift according to the, well, as we'll see, the whims of the dice. Prior to the game, Ove sent us all a sheet with our characters on. He gave us a brief outline of the rules, and of course he told us what the setting was and what our particular objectives were. So let's see how it all played out. Fistful of Lead Reloaded then. Here's our rulebook, spiral bound for easy reference. Although, as I've said, we mostly relied on the sheets here. They've got pretty much everything you need on there to play the game. And here's my set of characters. So as you see, each one has some special abilities. These cards also give the weapon they're using, the range of that weapon, and so on. And I got 6 characters because the Marshal, the head honcho, is a very good leader. So he gets an extra follower. And here they are on the table. Very nice figures these that Ove was using. I don't know who the manufacturer is, but they were very nice, especially the stagecoach, which is going to turn up a bit later on. So it's Minnesota, 1875, and the scenario is called For a Jarful of Lingonberries. We have some Sioux warriors on one corner. We have some cowboys coming in on that far corner there by the corral. There's some bandidos approaching from the third corner, and the Marshal and his men in my corner. So in that trading post in the centre of the table, there's a very important consignment of lingonberry jam, and Jamboree Johnson is going to be turning up on his stagecoach very soon, and it's my job to see that the jam is loaded on the stagecoach and it is escorted safely off the table. That's my task. I don't know what the task of the other players is, but I suspect I'm soon going to find out. So as I mentioned, this is card based. You get 1 card per figure, and you activate in terms of the highest card goes first, and there's a suit order as well. So you will get to activate all your figures, but of course you don't know exactly when. Paul's Bandidos made an early rush along the road. All the figures are mounted at the moment, by the way, and you get 2 actions. So you can move, shoot, aim and shoot, and so on. One of Paul's bandits takes an early shot from horseback at Rob's cowboys. Oh, it turns out they're not cowboys, they're actually bounty hunters. So I can see how that might develop. And I think Paul here set the scene for himself and me by immediately rolling a 1 and getting a gun jam. This was definitely the shape of things to come for us. And there's the bounty hunters spread out, looking very cinematic, I have to say. And here's the corral. We dubbed this the mediocre corral, slightly down from the OK corral. And there's the bandidos. And basically what happened on this side of the table was a big gun battle developed between the two. Meanwhile, the Marshal and his men decided to head straight for the trading post to try and secure the jam supply. And those Sioux warriors are creeping up through the undergrowth, and they're going to start taking pot shots at the Marshal. There's 2 jokers in the pack, and the first one came out in the second turn. That activates the civilians inside the trading post, so they're now on the alert, with potentially able to open fire at anyone who comes close. And the second joker, when it's played, heralds the arrival of the stagecoach. Now, I said Paul was rolling a lot of 1s, but he did get 1 good result, and this highlights the attributes that some of the characters can have. So he's got a character who's a sharpshooter, and he took a pot shot at the leader of the bounty hunters, rolled a 10. So that's an instant kill shot. However, the leader of the bounty hunters has got the attribute of 9 lives, like a cat. So that kill shot was downgraded to a wound. So poor old Paul, even when he got a good dice roll, things were against him. And as I said, we've got this real back and forth developed here between these 2 forces across the corral. And just a word of warning, don't get too attached to those cows. There's something coming up. Sensitive viewers might wish to cover their ears in a moment. Meanwhile, over on my side of the table, as I said, those warriors are taking shots at the Marshal and his men. And I thought I'd tuck one of my men in just at the corner of the building there, because he's got a buffalo gun, a pretty hefty weapon. However, he got surprised by the warrior charging at him. Bear in mind these are both on horseback, and our friend there has got a rather long and sharp lance. So we go to the melee table here. This is all done on dice roll, a very simple dice roll, a d10 or potentially a d12 if you have the attribute, and the possible outcomes are no effect, shaken, wounded, or out of action. Now, with the bonus for the charge, and given that he was on horseback and everything else, Elliot made a good roll here. In fact, Elliot was making consistently good dice rolls to my poor ones, and so The poor old character there, speared through the chest, and off he goes. Now this did expose that brave to the concentrated fire of 4 of my posse. However, the dice rolling was so appalling that he got away without a scratch. In fact, this character did very well. He survived pretty much everything thrown at him until the very last moment. And this gave the opportunity for Elliot to start moving his other characters up, and it became clear now that his target was the trading post. Meanwhile, the gunfight at the mediocre corral continues, with neither side really gaining an advantage. It's a bit of a stalemate at this stage. So what do you do in a stalemate? Yes, you throw dynamite. The bandidos lob a stick of dynamite. Unfortunately, it falls a bit short, especially unfortunate for those poor cows. And, well, we'll just draw a discreet vowel over that, shall we? The Braves, meanwhile, shooting from inside cover, have got the Marshal and his men pinned down in the open. My return fire wasn't very effective. There's another one rolled. That counter there signifies another gun jam. And, yeah, I'm firing from horseback, and my opponents are in cover, and they also get a natural attribute of being very stealthy, so that makes them harder to hit as well. However, I did manage to get one character up close. This is the doctor of the group, funnily enough. He managed to close in with his shotgun and take on that warrior there. Yeah, it didn't end well. And meanwhile, Elliot is moving more of his characters up to the trading post. Another stick of dynamite sails across the corral. This one goes a bit further. Unfortunately, it lands just the wrong side of the wall. Or, well, the right side for the bounty hunters. And they're sheltered from the blast. They take no damage. The second Joker came out in this turn, and that means the stagecoach arrives. We roll a dice to see what corner it comes on from. And there it is. Looking very fine. What a lovely model. I believe that's 3D printed, but again, I don't know the manufacturer. So this really signals the climax of the scenario, the final reel, if you like, of this Western movie. So Jamboree Johnson's job now is to get to the trading post, load in the Lingonberry jam, and then there's a dice roll to see which corner he exits off of. The scrap at the trading post continues. The Marshal's men are still a bit pinned down there, they're not really making much headway. I do manage to get one of the deputies to sneak round the corner of the building there, hopefully to surprise the warriors as they come out. Meanwhile at the corral, we're getting a bit of close-in melee action as one of the bounty hunters charges the bandidos. It looks like his gun is jammed there, so he's going in with the butt of his rifle, I imagine. The stagecoach is going to be on the move in a moment. I think someone might want to tell that chap in the sombrero he needs to get out of the road. And I mentioned the gun jam markers earlier, so there's no record keeping as such, everything is done with counters. There's a wound counter by that chap with the poncho, and the other counter you can have is the shaken one. And of course, as you start to accumulate wounds or being shaken, that'll have a negative effect on your ability to shoot, to melee, and so on. And there's an overview of the mid-game situation, as chance would have it, because it was random which corner we each came in on. You know, it just so happened that myself and Elliot were quite close to our objectives. I'm still not sure, even at this stage, what the objectives of the bandidos and the bounty hunters are, but they seem to be having a good time. And so the Braves are into the trading post. The civilians have fled, and the Braves are free now to do whatever it is they're going to do to that consignment of jam. I suspect they're going to spoil it in some way. And outside, the melee continues. Now it's the doc facing that enraged spearman. Meanwhile, the bounty hunters are in a strong position behind that wall of the corral. They're proving difficult to dislodge. How do you dislodge them? Yes, you throw your third stick of dynamite. And this time Paul gets the good dice roll, and look at that, right on target, bang on target. Unfortunately, his luck didn't continue, because for the damage, he made a very poor roll, and that lucky cowboy in the middle there took no damage from the dynamite at all. So, very bad luck there. There's the one. Look at that. I managed to get another figure up into that melee to assist the doc, and as you can see, We've given our opponent 2 shake encounters there, but still we can't dislodge him. Tough character, this one. Now it's the turn of Jamboree Johnson and the stagecoach to move, and here is where we get some real cinematic action, because one of the bandidos decides he's going to leap from his saddle onto the stagecoach. And one thing I like about this game is you get points for doing things like that. Doesn't matter if he succeeds or fails, you do get points for doing these sort of deeds of daring do. Inevitably, of course, Paul rolled a 1 and the poor old bandido disappears under the wheels of the wagon. What a shame. Meanwhile, the dockers bought it, leaving Hamish to fight on alone against this most persistent foe. More shooting from the shrubbery. This time it's all aimed at the marshal, and this time he starts taking some hits. He gets a shake encounter. That doesn't affect him because of his attributes, but he does then take a wound, and even worse, this wound makes him fall from his horse, and in that fall he breaks his leg. The marshal is effectively out of the game. Despite their strong position, the bounty hunters have started taking casualties now. They're in danger of being outnumbered because apart from that one unfortunate chap, the bandidos haven't really lost anyone yet. And now we get our second daring manoeuvre of the game as the man in black attempts to jump from his horse onto the back of the stagecoach. The dice roll succeeds, and there he is. He's on top of the stagecoach. Jamboree Johnson is going to jump off and scarper. Effectively, this gives the bandidos control of the stagecoach. And he did all of that with a guitar slung over his shoulder. What a hero. So that was largely it. Rob's bounty hunters there also got some unlucky dice rolls towards the end of the game, so they weren't able to press ahead. The bandidos are in charge of the stagecoach. I continued rolling 1s. Although having said that, Hamish and Two Gun Bob did acquit themselves quite well at the end there. They actually managed to inflict some damage and so clawed back some dignity for the marshal's posse. There's the bandidos moving up to the trading house. I don't know if their objective was just to get the stagecoach or if they were going to get the jam as well, which of course by this stage has been spoiled by the warriors. Oh yeah, and in case I didn't mention it, all those dice rolls are on a D10, although leaders get to roll a D12 and you want to roll high, you're looking to roll above. So a 1 is always a miss or a fumble, and a 10 will always hit. So excellent game. Thanks very much to Ove for organising that and putting so much work into it. Excellent figures and terrain and buildings as well. Big thanks to my opponents, Rob, who was the bounty hunters, Paul, who was the bandidos, and Elliot with his Sioux warriors. Good game. There we go then, a very clear result I think, which is nice because if you're playing a game for 3 or 4 or even more hours, it's good to have a nice clear result at the end, particularly with this objective based setup. Everyone really enjoyed the game. We got used to the mechanics very quickly, it was very easy to pick up. There weren't really any rule issues, and you know, 1 or 2 little things came up, quick reference to the rules, and that was it. But most of the time we were working off the play sheet. That's how easy the mechanics were to pick up and play. I like the card activation and the fact that some cards came with a little extra bonus like +1 to melee and so on. So you had that element of chance, you weren't quite sure what was happening next, but you also had the choice to make of which character am I going to activate with that card. So a nice balance between that random element, but also a feeling that, you know, you're in control of the situation. Not total control, but as I said, those games where you feel like you have no control at all, personally I find not so much fun to play. And of course with just 5 figures or so to control, each one develops a character as well, and that's something that comes across in the game. So there's that little sort of RPG element that creeps in as well, which was a lot of fun. It seemed well balanced overall. Now, balance is quite a thing in war games. Do you want sides that are totally even all the time? Or do you want to have this little mix? I mean, historically, when was there ever an even battle? Probably quite a rare situation, I would think. So you want some element of advantage and disadvantage. And I think what this does nicely, or what Fistful of Lead does nicely, is your character can have certain attributes. So you see, like my Marshal, for example, was steady. He wasn't affected by being shocked or shaken. Uh, Other people might have fast draw or they're sharpshooters. So, you might have less characters or less figures, but they could have better attributes. That then comes down to that management of resources or how you manage your character figures. And although the game did end in that very clear victory, it did feel balanced throughout. My early failures were largely down to my poor tactical thinking, and myself and Paul seemed to be mining a very rich seam of bad dice rolls. We were rolling ones like nobody's business. So, that's the way things go. That aside, I did manage to rally a little bit at the end and at least clawed back some dignity. Overall, then, a very enjoyable game. Very easy to get into and learn how to play. Nice work from Ove on setting up the scenarios and the characters and adding in all those little touches that really brought the game to life. We're going to be playing part 2, part 2, in a few weeks' time. Hopefully the Marshal will be recovered by then. Hopefully Hamish is going to get his revenge. We shall see. As always, do let me know if you played Fistful of Lead. I'd be particularly interested to hear if you tried some of the other genres, the sci-fi, the fantasy, etc. Is it pretty much the same mechanics? Do games unfold in pretty much the same way? And I'd also be interested to hear any other Wild West recommendations you have, because, as I say, it is a very rich source for skirmish type games. There's so many scenarios, you can think of a dozen off the top of your head. Okay, that's it for now. It's time to untether my horse. I'm going to ride off into the sunset. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking, sharing, and subscribing. And I'll see you soon.